Redline logbook here to explain Danmachi's guild. To explain the guild, we gotta start off 1,000 years ago, when the first three gods ascended down to the mortal realm. One of these three gods was Oranos, and the way Oranos landed was actually destroying the original Tower of Babel that was sealing the dungeon. Now, he did this for two reasons. One, to announce the fact that a god has just ascended, but two, the tower was insufficient, and he had an idea for an even better one. Now, Zeus and Oranos made an agreement that Zeus would handle the Familia members, while Oranos handled the guild. And the reason for this is because they knew once the proper seal was put on the dungeon, Aurora would become a major city, and it needed a governing body. And they both understood that if people with fauna had power over the city, it would become very might makes right, and neither of them wanted that. So they understood the city must be run by people who have no fauna whatsoever, just normal people with normal bodies, and so Oranos would be the one to do that. But first, he had to select one individual and give them a fauna. The reason for this is because he needed the proper Tower Babel built, and only a person with fauna, with superhuman powers, would be able to build what he needed to be built. And so he gave his fauna to one individual and one individual only, and that was Daedalus. After receiving Oranos' fauna, he then built the proper Tower Babel, one that was a stronger seal on the dungeon, so no monsters could escape, but also, underneath Tower Babel, there would be an altar, where Oranos would sit for the rest of eternity, praying to the dungeon, because the prayers of a god weaken the dungeon. This was the only task that Oranos asked Daedalus to do. After this, the two basically cut ties, mostly because Daedalus went insane. Daedalus will have his own video, don't worry about it. The point is, after the tower and the altar were built, Oranos then started constructing the guild. And as gods descended from heaven, creating their own familias, more and more rules had to be established. Rule 1. The guild has full authority over the dungeon. Now, a familia is allowed to take whatever they want from the dungeon, but they must get permission from the guild to even go into the dungeon. Now, the guild is very loose on this. They'll let anyone in. As long as their familia aren't a bunch of criminals, anyone is allowed in the dungeon. A god, when first entering Aurora, must register with the guild. They must determine if they're going to be a dungeon exploring familia or they're going to be a merchant familia. Warring between the familias is completely outlawed unless a war game is determined, in which case the gods must be the ones to decide on the rules of said war game, and then everyone can enjoy the fight. If the city is ever attacked, all the gods and their familias must immediately be drafted to fight in its protection. No one is allowed to leave the city walls unless they are given permission by the guild. At a certain point, 3 familias were given an exception to this rule, allowing them to leave whenever they feel like it, one being the Demeter familia because they run the farms outside the city, 2 being the Ganesh familia because they're the police of the city, and 3 being the Hermes familia because they kind of run underground things for Oranos. The guild also has the authority to levy any fines or taxes they see fit on the familias, and of course they have the authority to banish any familia they see fit. This rarely happens though. And of course there are many laws, but I can't go into all of them. Now, the system of ordinary people running the city actually worked out great, because Oranos, while he has political power, he has no actual physical violence that he can implement himself. He has to trust other familias to back him up. Originally, the Zeus and Hera familia, and now he has the Ganesha familia. But that's just there to keep the peace. It's not really there to enforce Oranos' rule over the city, the guild rule over the city. What does it is the fact that everyone understands that if the guild wasn't in charge, their familia would basically be crushed and put under the boot of the strongest familia. And so all these familias, especially the mid-rank and lower ranks, would rather have the guild in charge than have someone like Loki, or Freya, or Zeus, or Hera, or Ganesha, or Ishtar, or any other of the top-tier familias. Civilian rule also allowed Aurora to grow exponentially because the vast majority of Aurora's population are civilians, people without fauna. And because the guild is heavily focused on abstracting resources from the dungeon and then turning those resources into magic items, the civilian businesses exploded in Aurora. It is the wealthiest city in the world. There's an entire district of Aurora dedicated just to magic stone manufacturing, where they process the magic stones and then turn them into magic items, from lancers to water purifiers to anything else you can think of. And once again, these civilians feel safe and comfortable in their lives because they're ruled over by other civilians. They're not ruled over by adventurers. It's better for them to have just normal people being in charge. Now, Oranos' main goal was 2. 1, completion of the 3 grand quests, and 2, get to the bottom of the dungeon. And so the guild ended up enforcing 2 major rules for all familias. And so they ended up creating a ranking systems for these familias for these rules, depending on the military strength of each familia. I being the weakest possible a familia can be, S being the strongest they could possibly be. Historically, there have only been 5 S ranks in all of Aurora's history: Zeus, Hera, Loki, Freya, and Ganesha. But once again, this is used to fulfill the two major goals of the guild. Once your Familia hits D rank, the guild can send you on missions. Missions are basically a quest to send you deeper into the dungeon. Once again, their goal is to get all the way to the bottom eventually. And so sending people on quests is their way of just slowly, little by little, getting people deeper and deeper into the dungeon. As for the 3 great quests, the way they determine who gets sent on this is, first off, anyone who wishes to volunteer can volunteer to go. It's recommended that you don't do this because you'll probably die. But if you are a first-tier adventurer, you have to go. So if the guild tomorrow said we're going to take on the One-Eyed Black Dragon, anyone who's a level 5 or higher must go take on the One-Eyed Black Dragon. Other lower-tier adventurers can volunteer, but level 5 and higher must go. Other than these 2 things, any other policy or decision made by the guild was made by the people of the guild, not by Oranos. For example, every 3 months the gods meet up for a meeting to discuss current issues and also give any child that leveled up a new name. This process is known as Danmachi. Now, originally this was just a group of gods gossiping together like children, but when the guild caught on to it, they assumed it was this big meeting that these wise and amazing gods were having, and so they just decided to make it an official thing that happens every 3 months. Anyone who has a Familia member who's a level 2 or higher is allowed to enter and be a part of Danmachi. The guild has also implemented projects to better Aurora and the world, one being the construction of the largest ship in the world, which would then become the school district, which collected the brightest and most talented minds around the world, and educate them in all fields. Currently, in the common day, as of volume 19 of Danmachi, the guild has decided to construct an elevator inside the dungeon to allow for easier access to the deeper floors, and etc., on many other construction projects that the guild has implemented. The guild is also responsible for every holiday in Aurora, the 3 major ones being Monsterphilia, Elegia, and the Harvest Festival. And once again, there are more holidays that the guild has to handle, but those are the 3 main ones. Now for the inner workings of the guild. So technically, the head of the guild is Oranos, but once again, he likes the mortals to take care of themselves, because he thinks that they should be the ones responsible for the mortal realm. As such, he picks an individual to be the guild head. The current leader is an elf named Royman. He is actually looked down upon by many other elves because of how fat he is, because elves are very big on being beautiful and elegant and such. And the fact that there is an elf who's so greedy and selfish and gluttonous that he would turn himself into a 250-pound man is a disgrace to them. He's consistently referred to as the guild pig and is heavily disrespected by everyone. But he's actually very intelligent and very prudent man. Oranos knew what he was doing when he picked Royman to be the leader of the guild. His intelligence is pointed out here and there. For example, when Ina was faking reports about Bel to cover up the fact that he does so much stuff, Royman was able to see the inconsistencies in the report, and he knew that she was lying, and even called her out on it at a certain point. 2, whenever he is debating with Finn, he's actually able to get a pretty good deal for the guild, and Finn is considered to be one of the greatest tacticians in all of Aurora. He's considered a genius, and Royman is able to keep up with him. In fact, he's even able to win some exchange with Finn. And finally, when Freya tried to use her charm on Royman the first time, he actually was able to see it coming, and he actually squeezed his own stomach and twisted, using pain to avoid being charmed. But with his intelligence also comes the fact that he is in fact kind of a greedy, self-centered man. As a result, he kind of makes decisions that are clearly not good for the guild, but on the other hand, he doesn't care, because the short and long-term gains are vastly more valuable than any of the negatives he can see. Below Royman are the section leaders. These are the people who are allowed in the second floor of the guild, where they have all of their main meetings and such. And they, along with Royman, actually make the decisions of what the guild is going to do with Aurora or with the dungeon. The only section leader that we know about is Remor. He's a Sheanthrope, and he's directly above Ina and her group within the guild. He actually trusts Ina more than anyone else. In fact, he even took her to one of the second store meetings in Volume 19 because he actively wanted to hear her opinion on matters. Ina was actively against the elevator, which it was clear that Raymond was also against it, but he didn't say anything. He didn't help her. He didn't go against her. He just wanted to make sure that there was a voice besides his own that was up against the elevator. Obviously, Ina was shut down, but it's clear Raymond understands the politics of the guild, and he's getting Ina ready for it. because he's smart enough to realize that Ina will be one of the future leaders of the guild. And then below the section leaders are the standard guild members who do day-to-day tasks involving the adventurers. The main job that the guild employees do is interacting with new adventurers when they first join a Familia. Primarily, their job is to give them advice and such, see what's best for them to survive in the dungeon, but most guild employees have basically given up on that after years of seeing fresh-faced adventurers just die over and over in the dungeon. So primarily, the majority of them just give basic advice like, we got this type of armor and we got this type of weapon. Good luck. Ina and her friend Misha, who was inspired by Ina, actually give proper advice about each floor. They also explain the kind of items you're going to need for each floor, like salamander wolf for the middle floors, because there are monsters that can breathe fire. They also customize the advice they give for each individual adventure. So if there's a fighter whose primary role is to be a tank, they advise heavy armor, heavier weapons. And if they like to move around like a scout, then obviously lighter armor, lighter weapons. They advise different forms of weapon training based on their skill set. So if you have talent for a spear, then you should be focusing on learning how to use a spear, same with an arrow or whatever, depending on the individual. Once again, this is standard stuff that all guild members really should be doing, but it's only done by Ina and Misha because even with all of this advice, the survival rate is still about half. And so you just eventually get broken down hearing how someone that you've been taking care of this entire time just died one day. Because the dungeon is just like that sometimes. Something just goes wrong and the person just doesn't come back. The guild also allows the adventurer to ask for the type of advisor they want. So if they want a male dwarf advisor, they can get a male dwarf advisor. This is important because it's actually how Bel met Ina. Bel asked for a female elf to be his advisor. And so they had two options, Sophie, an elf, or Ina, a half-elf. Sophie refused to do it because when she saw Bel, she was like, that kid is going to die. He's so small, he's so weak. I don't want to get to know him. And then next thing I know, he's dead. I can't do that. I can't handle that. And so Ina decided to step up and become Bel's advisor. Since we're already talking about her, let's start with Ina. Ina started off in a demi-human village, primarily making up of humans and half-breeds. The reason for this is because half-breeds don't usually get along with anyone. They're usually shunned by all races. And since Ina was a half-elf, her mother and father, of course, were shunned by many. Especially Ina's mother, after leaving the royal forest, the same forest that Reveria is from, and marrying a human, she was basically just blacklisted from the elves. This didn't help with the fact that Ina's mother, in fact Ina as well, are technically descended from the royal line. Now they're a branch family, and so they have no claim to the throne of any kind, but they are technically 6 cousins from Reveria. In fact, Reveria and Ina's mother were actually best friends, and when Reveria finally left the forest, she actively went to go visit Ina's mother, and that's where she got introduced to Ina, and then Ina basically saw Reveria as her aunt at that point. With that being said, she's still very formal with Reveria because her mother taught her the full respects and dignity of an elf, and so she actively went out of her way to try to be as elf-like as possible as her mother wished. Unfortunately, her mother was also very ill. As a result of this, her father was forced to work 2 jobs to pay for the medicine that would keep his wife alive. Ina, at age 6, decided she was going to join the academy, so she'd end up with a proper education that would give her a job that would help her father pay for her mother's medicine. As receiving a proper education in many fields, specifically in the literary fields, she's actually well educated in math, the sciences of magical items, multiple languages, including hieroglyphs, which is the language of the gods, so it's almost impossible for a mortal to even learn it. As such, she was a perfect candidate when she finally applied for the guild. She was such a valuable wellspring of knowledge that Ina is the only guild employee who is only allowed to have 1 adventure as an advisor to, because she's given a ton of other tasks within the guild, because her skill set would be wasted just giving adventurers advice. To put this in perspective, when she took a day off once to go yell at Bel after the Zenos incident, everyone freaked out thinking the guild was going to fall apart. Of course, her response was, if a single person leaves an institution and that institution collapses, then there's a problem with the institution, not that person. Which is true, the guild didn't collapse without her being there, but that's the point. She was seen as being so valuable to the guild that they were scared when she took a day off. Now, this may sound like they're using her, but the fact is, Ina has already admitted to herself that she's a workaholic. She likes to work long hours. She likes doing her job, which is why she said a strong man adventure type that could sweep her off her feet and take care of her for the rest of her life is the complete opposite of what she wants. The kind of man she wants is the kind that she can take care of. She referred to this as the little brother type, basically Bel. As I said before, after she joined the guild, she went out of her way to make sure that her adventures survived the best they could. In fact, her adventures had the highest survival rate. We actually seen a few of them, Luvis and Dormal, and of course Bel. And finally about Ina, she actually has a pretty powerful will, to the point where she was able to actually break out of Freya's charm at a certain point when she remembered Bel. Unfortunately, just that moment, Freya appeared and reapplied the charm, completely re-controlling her mind. Another employee that we know of is Misha. She's Ina's best friend. They were both in the academy together, actually. And so when Ina decided to apply to be a guild member, Ina also had the same goal, and they joined together. She's very energetic, very lazy, doesn't like doing her work until the last minute, but at the same time, she's still very intelligent, and so she's able to get her work done. And what keeps her going in the guild is probably her respect for Ina, because once again, her and Ina are the only ones who do the job of a advisor to an adventurer, solely because Misha wants to be like Ina. So she's a real contradiction of lazy and hardworking. And she's actually the perfect friend for Ina, who is a workaholic, because Misha drags Ina out of such a state. Otherwise, Ina might actually die of overwork. Rose is a red-headed werewolf. She's clearly worked in the guild for years, and she's kind of the cynic of the group. She didn't start out that way. She actually started off bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, but at a certain point she ended up getting into a relationship with an adventurer. The two very much fell in love, but he died in the dungeon, and this broke her. After that, she's now very serious about keeping a wall between not just herself, but everyone who works at the guild and adventurers. She actively wants to protect everyone from such a thing, which is why she's always telling everyone not to get into a relationship with an adventurer. Let it be romantic or friendship, because in the end, it will always end in tragedy. It's clear the younger members of the guild very much respect and listen to what she has to say, because she just has that much experience over everyone else. I mentioned Sophie before, the elf that refused to be Bel's advisor. We don't know much about her, other than the fact that she's just part of the friend group that Ina, Misha, and Rose are in, who are constantly talking and gossiping together. And that's the entirety of the main branch. There is one side branch, which is in Melon, which is the port town outside of Aurorio. Reason for this is because Melon is extremely important in bringing in seafood, one of the major staples of Aurorio's food supply. But more importantly, there's a river flowing through Aurorio that connects to the port of Melon. As a result, Melon is probably one of the most strategic points outside of Aurorio for Aurorio. And so basically, that small town is basically the property of the guild. The only known member of the branch is actually the head of the guild branch, Nord. Well, former. He ended up getting fired after it was discovered that him, the mayor, and the god Nord were up to something immoral in Mullen. He's now a member of Nord's Familia, which is a fisherman familia. So basically, he went from being the head of a guild branch to being a fisherman. Now, that is the official structure of the guild, but there is, of course, an unofficial structure that no one knows about, but a very few handful, because once again, this is technically illegal what Oranos is doing. Oranos' right hand is not actually Norman, it is Fels. We actually don't know what Fels' real name is, but 800 years ago, he was known as the Great Sage, and he got this term because he was able to create the Philosopher's Stone, a magic item that gave the user immortality. He was so proud of this creation that he showed it to his god, and his god immediately smashed it in front of him. Not because the god was against a mortal becoming immortal, no, that had nothing to do with it. He just thought it would be funny. After that, Fels just left his familia and continued to experiment on himself, till eventually he made himself immortal. Unfortunately, either his experimentation rotted his body and turned him into a skeleton, or his immortality didn't come with eternal youth, like the Philosopher's Stone would have. As a result, he would have just rotted away as he aged. But now, Fels is permanently stuck as a skeleton, unable to die, unable to sleep, unable to eat, unable to feel. A being permanently cursed to suffer for all eternity, which is why he refers to himself as Fels the Fool. At some point, he joined forces with Oranos, deciding because he no longer has a place in the mortal realm, he might as well serve the god of Aurorio. And so for centuries, he basically was Oranos' Black Ops operative, basically handling anything behind the shadows the guild needed done, and also covering up anything the guild didn't want to get out. He was seen a few times at night by some of the staff at the guild, and so a legend ended up being created known as the Ghost of the Guild. Fels is extremely loyal to Oranos. He's also extremely loyal to the Zenos, which we'll get to, and finally, the Hestia Familia, specifically Bel, because of what he did for the Zenos, and how much he was willing to sacrifice for them. Now, like I said before, Fels no longer sees himself as part of humanity. He sees himself separate from both the mortals and the gods, some third thing altogether, and so he was happy just staying on the sidelines, but ever since the Zeno incident. He is now known by many, including the Hestia Familia, the Freya Familia, the Loki Familia, the Hermes Familia. Pretty much anyone of importance now knows who Fels is, and he's now stuck dead center in the middle of everything. And so he decided to take a more active role in this world, specifically slaying the one-eyed black dragon. After Evilus was destroyed, the guild got full control over Noxus and are currently using it. Plus, there's a lot of valuable materials down there, so they're also strip mining it. Fels was given a room. Fels refers to it as the perfect lair for an evil mage and his experiments. And so now Fels is doing what he did when he was human 800 years ago. He's currently running his experiments. Specifically, he's working on something that is supposed to help with the fight against the one-eyed black dragon. What this experiment is, currently, I do not know, but Fels is happy to get back to his old work. He's just a happy alchemist running his experiments. And finally, the Zenos. We do not know when the guild discovered them, but it happened either decades or centuries ago. Either way, they are the secret army of the guild. Like I said at the beginning of this video, the guild is not supposed to have a military branch. They are not supposed to have anyone with fauna whatsoever. And technically, the Zenos don't have fauna. But if anyone found out about this, obviously this would be a massive scandal that would destroy the guild. Not just because they have an entire army on par with an A-class Familia, but also because the Zenos are talking conscious monsters. First off, that would surprise everyone that monsters can think, and two, the idea that the guild are working with them would be straight heresy. When Oranos first discovered these creatures even existed, he decided immediately that he wanted to create a bridge between humanity and the Zenos, so this way they can coexist. He realized this dream was insane, and this was proven out multiple times, because multiple people had discovered Zenos. Babel's Familia was not the first, but unlike the Hestia Familia, who risked everything, including their reputation for the Zenos, these other people, they completely turned against the Zenos. Even if they were nice to them at the beginning, once it was their lives on the line, they chose their lives. And this is why discovering Babel was such a major moment for Oranos, the Zenos, and Fels, because they finally found a noble human who would be a hero, not just for humanity, but for the Zenos. They finally found the last great hero. Or at least that's what Oranos believes. But before this happened, the Zenos basically had a partnership with Oranos directly, where they would be supplied with food, weapons, and anything else they needed to survive. In exchange, they did secret missions for the guild. Like, it's perfectly common and normal for the guild to send out missions for a Familia to kill a certain monster that's causing problems in the dungeon, usually an irregular. The Bloody Troll is a perfect example. The Moss Huge is another. But while that is common, it's actually more common than people realize, because the Zenos usually handle those quests before they ever get to the public on the surface. Basically, the vast majority of problems that happen in the dungeon were originally handled by the Zenos as part of the agreement with Oranos. And so the things that the people on the surface hear about are either problems that are too strong for the Zenos to deal with, and so the Freya and Loki Familia had to take care of it, and before that the Zeus and Hera. Or they're problems that escalated so fast that Oranos couldn't keep them secret, and so he had to have the surface dwellers deal with it. And that is everything you need to know about the guild so far. Obviously, more will most likely be revealed with future novels. As of recording this video, there are 19 Danmachi novels and 14 Sword Art Artoria novels. So in the years that go by, I'm sure more information will come out, and so in a few years I might actually make an updated video. But for now, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please subscribe, give it a thumbs up so you enjoy more Danmachi and other May things. Thank you and have a great day.